My reflection today is about leaving a legacy. In 1987, the Rotary Club of Melbourne raised $242,000 to build a heart risk reduction clinic and refurbish an existing risk evaluation clinic at the then named Baker Medical Research Institute, located at the Alfred Hospital. When Thomas Baker joined Australia's first Rotary Club in November 1922, we were in our second year. Thomas was president of the Rotary Club of Melbourne in 1928, but sadly died in office, and the shock felt then is written into our club's history. Thomas Baker's legacy included the Baker Trust, which encourages Rotarians to draw the attention of the trustees to programs worthy of support. Some of the programs proposed have representatives in the room today. More than a century on, Thomas's association with his Rotary Club continues through this act of philanthropy. The Rotary Club of Melbourne was recently registered as a public benevolent institution, and as a PBI we're now in a better structured way to raise and direct funds for specific programs and collaborate with the right organisations to deliver these programs. Thomas Baker was a visionary. As an industrialist and philanthropist, his benefaction has enabled Rotary Melbourne to continue to serve others. All communities in need, whether across Australia or our international neighbours, need more Thomas Bakers. Rotary needs more Thomas Bakers to create lasting impact. So for fellowship forged in service to others and friendships formed by good company shared over a fine meal, we give thanks.
Members, visitors and guests, it's our great pleasure to welcome you to our 41st meeting in our 105th year and our 10th Thomas Baker Oration. Today is an important day in the club's calendar, and we're honoured to have Professor John Greenwood, Director of the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute, deliver the 2026 Thomas Baker Oration. It seems like one of the themes of this Rotary year has been the celebration of centenaries associated with Rotary Melbourne and its members. I've attended celebrations of centenaries this year with Rotary Ballarat, Bendigo and Geelong, all sponsored by us 100 years ago. Today we have the Baker Institute established as a gift, as Tony led to us in a reflection 100 years ago by our distinguished past president Thomas Baker. John, who I've been enjoying conversing at the table, will be speaking on mending a broken heart and will be more formally introduced shortly by our Chair of the Day, past President Dr. Peter Rogers. In the meantime, would you please acknowledge and make them both welcome. We're very honoured to have returning as our special guests past Thomas Baker Oration and distinguished scientists, Professor Sharon Lewin, AO, and Professor Peter, who is also the Executive Director of the Peter Doherty Institute, and Dr. Ziggy Sikowski, AO, if you could, as well as guests of trustees of the Baker Foundation, Kate Metcalf, Elizabeth Delaney, Robert Nevercote, along with our current club members and former trustees, Trevor Nick and Craig Johnson. Would you please acknowledge and make these guests and members welcome. Among our many guests today, including guests and members, we have my guests, Prasanna De Silva, CEO of the Mission to Seafarers Victoria, and Gary Domingo, Philippine Consul General in Melbourne. Also here are recipients of the Baker Philanthropic, distinguished scientists, CEOs and academics of many of our city's leading science research facilities. We are pleased to have a terrific representation from the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute in its centenary year. Also present is the Burnett Institute, the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute, Monash University, St Vincent's Institute of Medical Research, and our own corporate member, the Bionics Institute, with CEO Robert Klipkas and colleagues. We welcome you all. Would you please join me in acknowledging making all our visitors and guests of members, visiting Rotarians and visitors welcome. I would now like to call on our Rotarian Robert McGuirk to the podium. Rob will report on a significant milestone in the fight against trachoma and the role of Rotary with the Baker Foundation support. Rob.
Well, thank you very much, President Phil. I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing from Professor Greenwood about the fantastic work that the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute do. But I'd also like to inform you about how the Associated Baker Foundation has enabled Rotary to achieve a significant outcome for one of our major national projects. In 2016, as the chair of our Indigenous Programs Committee, I was tasked to create a national project to celebrate Rotary's work during our centenary year in 2021. After discussions with our honorary member, Professor Hugh Taylor, who is the head of the Melbourne University Indigenous Eye Health Unit, I learned that Australia was the only first world country with endemic trachoma. This is a blinding eye disease which affects our Indigenous Australians, and the World Health Organization had a goal to eliminate this globally by 2020. I decided, therefore, this ending trachoma was an ideal project for Rotary in Australia to get behind. Of course, it's nice to have ideas, but funds were needed to hire a professional, experienced project manager. Hence, I made an application to the Baker Foundation, which was successful, and it resulted in an award of $87,500 per year for 3 years to fund the project management expenses. But this also importantly enabled almost all of the funds subsequently raised from Rotary clubs to be used for the products and services that we were providing through the project. As a result of this support, and with an initial contribution from Rotary Melbourne itself as well, and the Rotary Club of Hall in Canberra, we were able to commence the project with the certainty we could fund it for 3 years. The project continued past 2020 as the WHO realised that they could not meet the 2020 target, and they moved their global goal to 2030. So we also continue with the Trachoma project, which has now been going for 10 years. To date, we've raised more than $1.2 million, which has enabled us to deliver more than 15,000 hygiene kits, which go to schools and communities to assist with their environmental health, 21,000 towels, more than 8,000 mirrors, because even the simple fact of having a mirror at child height is important to enable the children who are particularly affected to realise that they have a problem with their eyes. We've also built community laundries, water stations. We've delivered washer-dryer trailers, which are like the ones that Orange Sky used to do the clothes for homeless in cities. We've delivered some of those, and I'm going to Port Hedland on the 22nd of June to hand over our second one to the local Indigenous Health Authority. And water trailers as well for going out to events, and many other products and services for the Central Australian remote communities most affected by trachoma. Our club as well, the Rotary Club of Melbourne, has also funded 3 interactive water trailers for use by children in these remote communities to improve their eye health. In addition, we have raised the profile of Rotary nationally through our work with more than 40 Indigenous, government and non-government organisations where we participated in committees which are committed to doing this work, including the Australian Trachoma Alliance, which was chaired by past Governor-General Michael Jeffrey, now deceased. We have also appointed Rotary champions in districts all around Australia who spread the information about the project and have raised funds from the clubs in their districts. This work has also served to highlight to Rotarians some of the health issues that our Indigenous Australians face. So it was extremely exciting when less than 2 weeks ago, on the 29th of April, the WHO made the formal announcement that Australia had eliminated trachoma as a public health problem in Australia. This achievement is a significant step towards improving environmental health of our Indigenous Australians. We had originally hoped to celebrate this achievement in 2021, but persistence beyond this date has proved to be well worth the effort. It should be noted though, although this is a significant achievement, it's important that environmental work continue to improve the health of our Indigenous communities. This is essential to keep trachoma at bay and also to eliminate other environmental health issues and diseases that they suffer from. So we hope that Rotary clubs nationally will continue to provide assistance with this and other initiatives to improve the lives of our Indigenous Australians. So on behalf of the Rotary Club of Melbourne, my other Trachoma project directors, Kerry Kornhauser, RAM, and past District Governor Murray Verso, our project managers Leanne Trin and Sandy Fulcher, our district champions and all the Rotarians around Australia who have assisted with this project, we'd like to thank the Baker Foundation for its support, and as Phil's already noted, we have several of the trustees here present today again, so our thanks go to all of you for the assistance with this project. As without this, we could never have contributed to this significant achievement in Australia. Thank you.
Give me great pleasure to call on our Chair of the Day, past President Dr. Peter Rogers, and to further introduce our guest speaker. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, President Phillip. So we come to the Baker Oration 2026, coinciding with the centenary of the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute. This is indeed a historic occasion in the history of medical research in our country. This is the 10th occasion the Rotary Club of Melbourne's hosted the Thomas Baker Oration. The first was Dr. Alan Finkel AC, the former Chief Scientist of Victoria and former Chancellor of Monash University in 2016. And we've acknowledged that we have two of former orators here in the audience today, Sharon Lewin and Ziggy Switkowski. We have with us today a number of researchers from the Baker Institute and from other institutes supported by the Baker Foundation. And I wish also to pay my personal respects to three Baker Foundation trustees who are here, Kate Metcalf, Elizabeth Delahunty and Rob McGuirk. I'll shortly introduce Professor John Greenwood, who will present today's oration. This oration celebrates Thomas Baker, a former president of our club. Thomas Baker was born in Somerset, England in 1854 and migrated to Australia at age 10. He trained initially in pharmaceutical chemistry. He studied a year of medicine at Melbourne University, then decided to pursue a career in the new field of dry plate photography. This company was the Austral Plate Company, and it was so successful it became Kodak Australia in 1908. When he died, as we've heard, in 1828, partway through his term as president of Rotary Melbourne, he'd already generously supported the establishment of the Baker Institute 2 years earlier. And so then in his will, he established the Baker Foundation, which also supports the Institute. Our 2026 orator is Professor John Greenwood, a cardiologist and the current Director and CEO of the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute, located near the Alfred Hospital. Professor Greenwood trained and graduated from the University of Leeds in 1991. And for the cricket enthusiasts here, he shared with me that he lived within walking distance of Headingley, which is important to the tradition of cricket in this country. After general medical training in Yorkshire, he undertook a clinical PhD in Leeds, funded by the British Heart Foundation. His research has been primarily directed to restoring heart function after heart attack and mRNA vaccines to prevent heart attack. This is a subject of importance given Melbourne's excellence in heart research facilities and hospitals, including the Alfred and the new Heart Hospital at Monash. It's a subject which would have fascinated Thomas Baker. So please join with me in welcoming to the stage Professor John Greenwood to deliver the 10th Thomas Baker Oration.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and it's a great honour to be here today. And I'd like to start by just saying that a few years ago I did something that surprised a lot of people. I packed up my family and swapped the historic countryside of Yorkshire, England, which we've just heard about, for the beautiful Melbourne Bayside suburbs. And people asked me why I did that. And I think the answer starts 50 years ago with my mum. At the age of just 35 years, when I was only 7, she had a heart attack while I was at home with her. She didn't call an ambulance or go to the hospital because she thought it wasn't serious at the time. And she was lucky to survive. But there wasn't really very much treatment in those days for a heart attack in a hospital, other than bed rest and morphine and perhaps a beta blocker if you were one of the lucky survivors. Consciously or subconsciously, that experience kindled something in me, driving me to study medicine at university and perhaps shaping my future career. I became really focused on the critical role that medical research plays in healthcare delivery. A conviction that this work really matters, and that with the right people in the right place, with the right resources and support, we can genuinely affect change and improve the lives of families like mine. I believe that such a place is here in Melbourne at the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute. It's this desire to deliver impactful change that has helped establish the Institute. As you've heard, 100 years ago, almost to the day, a small group of clinician scientists asked themselves a simple question. What if we could change the story of diseases like heart disease, not by managing the decline, but advancing discovery? At that time, heart disease was a silent sentence. Diabetes was a life cut short. And these weren't just statistics. These were real people, our fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, sons and daughters. In May 1926, right here in Victoria, we took a bold step thanks to Thomas Baker. Thomas, as you heard, was already creating his own path, a man who studied medicine in 1882, but then switched to experimenting with photographic dry plates. He went on to build the most successful photographic manufacturing company in the country, which later merged with Kodak. A scientist, inventor, photographer, and a philanthropist of rare vision. Thomas, his wife Alice, and her sister Eleanor made a decision that still echoes today. They left a bequest to establish the Medical Research Institute. There are a few people who have lived a life so colourful, or with greater impact than Thomas Baker, with his entrepreneurial spirit matched only by his generosity. From one small laboratory at the back of the Alfred Hospital to one of now the world's leading heart and diabetes research institutes. Over 100 years, that family and belief has grown into something quite extraordinary. From understanding the causes of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, to translating that science from the lab bench to bedside and into communities across Australia and beyond. It's that global impact that first attracted me to the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute to become its first international director. As you've heard, until that point, I worked as a frontline cardiologist in the UK's NHS, specialising in coronary intervention and cardiac MRI imaging. I spent 20 years as a public hospital consultant delivering emergency heart attack treatment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not just on my own, obviously, that would have been quite tough, but it was one of the largest heart centres in Europe. We served a population for heart attack care of 3.2 million people. So if you think about a city the size of Melbourne, that would be 2 hospitals really serving this city and its suburbs for heart attack care. It was absolutely enormous. And while big is often beautiful, if you're really interested in real-world patient-focused research, working in a hospital of that scale was an amazing place to be. Being an academic cardiologist interested in coronary artery disease, which is the narrowing of the arteries in your heart that eventually rupture to cause a heart attack, the sheer volume and complexity of patients that I saw provided the perfect environment for studying new drugs and devices to reduce the damage that a heart attack causes. Also, like Thomas Baker, with his fascination for photographic images, I quickly realised the potential of cardiac MRI, using an MRI scanner, if you like, to take photographic images of the heart. Now, MRI scanners use powerful magnetic fields to produce really exquisite three-dimensional images. But when I started in the 1990s, it was really just a research tool in terms of heart disease, with very, very limited clinical applications. The reason being, it's very hard to take a picture of a moving object like the heart, because you get a lot of motion and blurring. Think of it a bit like trying to take a picture of a Formula 1 racing car when you're quite close to it. You just get a very blurred photograph. And that's the same with MRI of a moving organ on the heart. But because of the size of our cardiac centre and the physicists and scientists there, I was able to help develop some of the MRI imaging techniques that capture the motion of the heart and track the blood flow through the small heart arteries to the heart muscle. These novel techniques enabled me to design and deliver a series of landmark clinical trials over the last 15 years that led to cardiac MRI being adopted widely in the NHS. Not only that, these trials became the key evidence cited in both the American and the European international practice guidelines, giving it the highest recommendation now for clinical use. But sadly, despite having all of the necessary scanners and trained staff in Australia, this test isn't available in the public hospitals here, as it doesn't have a Medicare item number. I think this is a real tragedy, and I hope one day that I can contribute to change that, and we are working on that at the moment. But I hope that one day every Australian has access to this imaging technique as a state-of-the-art diagnostic test. So what does the future hold for the Baker? With a new 5-year strategy, we've focused our efforts on 4 of the world's most pressing health challenges: heart attack, heart failure, diabetes and obesity. Our ambition isn't modest. We want to transform the lives of everyday Australians. And right now, in our laboratories, that transformation is underway. So let me tell you about some of our bold ideas to mend a broken heart. First of all, why wait until the heart attack occurs? Why not prevent it happening in the first place? If we could truly achieve that, it would be transformational. One of the approaches that we're looking at is developing mRNA therapies to prevent heart attacks. Now, this is the mRNA technology that you'll have heard a lot about, how it's shaped our vaccine programs for things like the response to flu and the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's currently revolutionizing the treatment for cancer. But we're harnessing that same technology and scientific innovation for cardiovascular disease in ways that weren't even imaginable, not just 10 years ago, but even 5 years ago. Finding a treatment to prevent heart attacks is probably the holy grail of cardiology, and I believe now we're in reach. We know that a heart attack is caused by the rupture of the plaque, the narrowings in the arteries, and this is driven by inflammation. And using messenger RNA, we can potentially turn off that inflammation, delivering that targeted therapy just into the heart itself using lipid nanoparticles. Now that way we can theoretically create a vaccine for atherosclerosis, which is the furring up process that we get in the arteries in the body, similar to what's been done in cancer and multiple sclerosis. And that's why with the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute's funding, and also from private philanthropy, we've now established a dedicated centre for mRNA cardiovascular therapies, leading the global challenge to make heart attack vaccine a reality. At the same time, we're also looking at how we can reprogram heart cells. When a heart attack strikes, the main coronary artery blocks, meaning that blood and oxygen can't get downstream to the heart muscle, and those muscle cells die. Those muscle cells can't regenerate. Dead muscle becomes scar, unable to contract, unable to pump, and the heart is permanently damaged. And when enough scar builds up, this leads to heart failure, despite surviving the initial heart attack. And in fact, because we've become so successful in preventing death from heart attack by operating day and night as soon as one occurs, and opening the artery and putting a stent inside, we're now seeing an epidemic of heart failure cases in the survivors. Current treatments can reduce the symptoms, but none of them restore what's lost, leaving millions of people managing lifelong complications and living with an uncertain future. At the Baker, we want to change that. We're developing injectable therapies that seek to reprogram the scar tissue forming cells and turn them back into contracting healthy heart cells again. How do we do that? Again, using mRNA technology, we've identified a number of target genes that control the heart scar formation, which can be manipulated to reprogram these cells into contracting heart muscle cells. Thus, I can imagine a future where we're not just treating what remains, the failing heart after a heart attack, but we have the ability to rebuild and regenerate the heart and keep it beating normally. Now, a heart attack is only one of dozens of different causes of heart failure. And for many of those patients, this ultimately leads to what we term end-stage heart failure, a condition that has a higher mortality rate than many of the common cancers. A tiny proportion of those patients may be lucky enough to receive a heart transplant, but for the rest, the future's bleak. However, at the Baker, we firmly believe that there is hope for people in whom a transplant may never come. We're building and testing a completely implantable artificial heart. You may have heard of the Bivacor Total Artificial Heart. It's one of 3 technologies being developed under our Artificial Heart Frontiers program, alongside a new implantable mini pump and a left ventricular assist device, both of which are implanted next to the natural heart. But this is an amazing innovation. This is a combination of a centrifugal rotary pump with magnetic levitation. So it's using levitation so that the metallic surfaces are not in contact with each other, so they don't wear out. It's a bit like a magnetic levitated train. It doesn't actually run in contact with the rails, it runs just above. And so this pump can be implanted in the body, taking the place of the natural heart, and hopefully have a long-term, durable lifespan. And it's Australian ingenuity at its most ambitious. A $50 million federal government grant from MRFF, backed by the best universities here in Melbourne, Monash, in Queensland, hospitals such as the Alfred, and industry partners. The goal is to produce the most advanced artificial heart. And interestingly, a handful of patients worldwide have now received this device. But it's amazing to think that the very first patient to survive with this device and be discharged home occurred here in Australia just this year. Can you imagine that? A completely implantable, completely artificial heart. I think it's astounding. What's more, we've also recently established Australia's first cardiometabolic imaging facility to examine energy levels inside the beating heart muscle itself, giving us a window into cardiac chemistry that no other institution in the country has. A decrease in heart energetics is one of the earliest signs that something is wrong and that heart muscle may start to fail. And so in collaboration with Oxford University, who I've worked with for many years, we're using that insight to identify people at risk of heart failure before it takes hold and to personalise their treatments for those living with obesity and diabetes. For example, we know that some types of diabetes drugs can improve cardiac energetics, whereas others don't. So being able to switch drugs on the basis of a cardiac energetic measurement may lead to protecting the diabetic heart from future heart failure. Other things that we're doing include embracing the latest technology to deliver advanced care to everyone, including those in rural and remote communities. Because of shortages of trained staff, high-tech cardiac imaging in rural and remote Australia is often delayed, and we know that delayed diagnosis costs lives. So we're developing a robot-assisted ultrasound system that brings heart imaging to patients anywhere in the country, with the use of artificial intelligence and the robotic arm that can be controlled and monitored from hundreds or even thousands of miles away. The heart ultrasound pictures can be generated and delivered to a cardiologist here in the city for timely diagnosis and treatment. What's even more exciting is the possibility that artificial intelligence may not only just acquire the images, but they also may analyse them immediately and remotely, removing much of the need for human contribution. These are not just small incremental steps and improvements, these are transformational moonshots. But we have to recognise that the headwinds are real, and the challenges are real, and so is our resolve. We're pursuing this work at a demanding time for medical research in Australia. Funding pressures have become critical. The withholding of $350 million per year for the Medical Research Fund was projected to see 10 of the 14 medical research institutes here in Victoria go bankrupt by 2030. Fortunately, there's been some glimmers of hope yesterday from the budget that announced that the MRFF funding release may be increased. But we also have the disappointingly low research grant success rate here in Australia that sees many of our brightest young scientists either leaving the academic sector completely or going overseas where funding is more easily available. On top of this, with rising costs of many of our academic institutions, all of them are making radical cutbacks. These are very difficult decisions and they paint a bit of a bleak landscape. But history teaches us something important. The Baker Institute has never waited for the right time and perfect conditions to do extraordinary work. Thomas Baker didn't wait, he acted. Progress has always required resolve, and the next 100 years will demand it again. Because if this past century was about understanding and treating heart disease, the next will be about rewriting destiny, about predicting and preventing heart disease and diabetes from ever occurring in the first place. None of this happens in isolation, and it's extraordinary people who make it possible. To our board, who selflessly provide the stewardship and foresight, to the Baker Foundation, established by Thomas, Alice and Eleanor, their financial support has allowed bold ideas to thrive when safer thinking might have failed. To Mr. Chuck Feeney and the Atlantic Philanthropists, their transformational gift gave us the purpose-built facilities that make all this amazing science possible. To our donors and philanthropists, they are the reason we can pursue solutions in the most critical health challenges of our times. And to our academic partners like the Universities of Melbourne, Monash, Deakin, La Trobe, internationally Oxford, Cambridge, and the Steno Diabetes Institute in Copenhagen, we thank them for the trust and collaboration that amplifies everything that we do here. And to our researchers, clinicians and professional staff, these are our quiet achievers, the ones who return to their desks, their labs, their patients day after day, driven not by applause but by purpose. They are the Baker. So this is a call to action. Today I want to ask you as Rotarians, as leaders, as citizens, not just to listen, but to act. You can help by championing heart health in your communities, supporting medical research through advocacy and philanthropy, encouraging the next generation to see science as a service, using your networks, your voices and your influence. Because progress is never driven by institutions alone, it's driven by people who believe that change is possible. People like Thomas Baker and people like you. So in closing, if the goal of the Baker family was to create a legacy with the greatest impact to the greatest number of people, it was certainly an inspired choice. There is no more urgent medical undertaking than this. Heart and cardiovascular disease kills more people than anything else on earth. About 20 million people per year, about 55,000 deaths per day. And sadly, at least one in 4 of us in this room will die of cardiovascular disease. My mum was fortunate. She's still going strong at 86 years old. Despite the previous heart attack, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, the high cholesterol, the kidney failure, and all the other things, she still keeps going. Indeed, less than a year ago, she flew out to Melbourne to stay with us for months, and she's already nagging me to come back again. But she wouldn't be here today unless the incredible medical innovation that she produced, produced those life-saving drugs and devices that she's received. And so, like Thomas Baker before us, we don't see the scale of this challenge as a reason to hesitate. We see it as a reason to act. That's why with the support of the entire Baker community, including groups like Melbourne Rotary, I'm excited about what's possible, of mending those broken hearts, of preventing heart attacks so we can all potentially live longer, healthier lives and free cardiovascular disease. Thank you.
I've got the great pleasure of thanking John, but more importantly, I'd like to congratulate the work of your institute. It's outstanding, and obviously in the 25 years I was last at Bayside Health, things have got a lot better. So I'd like to present to you a certificate for this occasion, a club history where you'll be able to find Thomas Baker, and a gift of the Rotary socks, which you'll be able to wear when you're doing your cardiac health exercise, and that is made in Preston by our past president, Phil Anders B. Wilderness Ware. Thank you. In closing, I would like to extend our thanks to Trevor Nink and the Thomas Baker Oration Committee for their efforts today and for the last 10 years. This annual event has become a very significant gathering for our foundations and researchers. Thank you to our guests for attending, and we encourage you to stay in touch with the club, of course. And thank you as always to the members for your kind support. A reminder that next week's Rotary meeting, we return upstairs to number 35 for lunch. Our guest speaker will be Nick Pearce, co-founder of fashion house and social enterprise Homey, and he will present the 2026 Young Achiever Awards, and we've also had the pleasure and the difficulty of selecting from an outstanding group of young people who have been nominated. Please join us as we recognise 3 under-25s for our efforts in the community. I now draw the meeting to the close. Thank you all for coming. Please stay on, enjoy the collegiality, and we look forward very much to seeing you again. Thank you.